Technology has been critical for us to advance healthcare. Take, for example, imaging. Last generation MRIs for cardiac imaging going to help us identify anatomy and defects in the heart structure, and therefore allow us to plan how to perform interventions, which, by the way, are also AI-enabled. We have software that allows us to measure the size of the organs, which is of critical importance for transplantation. Allows us to pick the right organ from a donor to be transplanted into a recipient.
طبعا في السابق قبل 10 سنوات 15 سنة كنا نقوم بعلاج جميع مرضى سرطان الرئة، يتم إعطائهم علاج كيماوي، ولكن حاليا بسبب استخدام التقنيات الحديثة وتقنيات خاصة لتحليل الطفرات الجينية والجسدية في هذه السرطانات نستطيع تحديد نوع السرطان. وهناك حاليا 10 أنواع مختلفة على سبيل المثال من سرطان الرئة، وكل سرطان يتم علاجه بعلاج مختلف تماما، وهذا عزز من فرص نجاح العلاج وأيضا الشفاء بإذن الله.
احنا يوم ناخذ اي عينه من المريض، العينه الجراحيه، ونبعثها للمختبر، 90% يمكن تكون العينه طبيعيه، لكن 10% العينه فيها شيء، الخلايا متغيره. هني الذكاء الاصطناعي كذلك يقدر يساعد الطبيب في انه يفرز له الحالات اللي هو يحتاج الطبيب يركز ويقدر يعرف فيها هي الحالات. هذا كم بيوفر من الوقت للطبيب انه يكون مركز مع المرضى بدل ما مثلا يضيع وقته في امور ممكن التكنولوجيا والذكاء الاصطناعي يساعده.
الذكاء الاصطناعي هو المستقبل مو بس على العلوم الطبية ولكن علوم كثيرة جدا. الذكاء الاصطناعي يساعدنا في خلق حلول لمشاكل العقل البشري بإمكانياته المحدودة ما يقدر يحلها، لكن الذكاء الاصطناعي وعلوم الحوسبة وعلوم الكمبيوتر المتقدمة عندها القابلية إنها تساعد القطاع الطبي على خلق حلول وخلق قطاع صحي متكامل. الآن في توجه إلى جعل الذكاء الاصطناعي يبحث في مسألة تداخل الأدوية مع بعض عند المرضى وتجنب العلاجات الجانبية من خلال وجود قاعدة بيانات للحساسيات وللأدوية ومطابقتها مع بعض قبل إعطاء الدواء للمريض.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سيدي سمو الشيخ حامد بن زايد آل نهيان، سمو الشيوخ، أصحاب المعالي والسعادة، الضيوف الكرام، السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. اسمحوا لي بداية بالتعريف عن نفسي. أخوكم الدكتور مشعل القاسمي، الرئيس التنفيذي لكل من مستشفى التأهيل التخصصي كابيتال هيلث ومركز هيلث شيلد الصحي. يشرفني اليوم أن أتولى مهمة إدارة هذا الحوار الذي يتمحور حول المسار المستقبلي للتكنولوجيا في مجال الطب والرعاية الصحية، حيث ستقوم الدكتورة كاثرين مور رئيسة مؤسسة إنتيوتيف فاونديشن بتقديم محاضرة بعنوان الاتجاهات التكنولوجية الجديدة في مجال الصحة، وستقوم من خلالها باستعراض رؤيتها وأفكارها بهذا المجال. ألفت لعنايتكم الكريمة بأن المحاضرة ستكون باللغة الإنجليزية، وبإمكانكم استخدام السماعات لمتابعة الترجمة الفورية. اسمحوا لي الآن بأن أتحدث باللغة الإنجليزية. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, Ladies and Gentlemen, it brings me great honor to introduce a pioneer in medicine, Dr. Kaathrin Moore, President of the Intuitive Foundation. Dr. Moore has combined her deep knowledge and expertise in engineering, technology, and medicine to advance the healthcare landscape. Her lecture today, titled Charting New Paths in Healthcare Technologies, will offer us insights into the bright future in healthcare and the transformational impact of technology on the healthcare system. Now, kindly join me in welcoming Dr. Kathrin Moore to start her lecture.
Thank you. Your Highnesses, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and my esteemed clinical colleagues, thank you for the opportunity to address you today to talk about the intersection of technology and medicine and how we might be thinking about these things in the future. When we think about being able to move patient care forward from the intersection of technology and healthcare, we need to be always thinking in the context of what is going to be best for the patient. How is it that we can reimagine this future that will be bringing us new longevity and healthcare in the future? But before I go into what is it that we're doing in the next few years, it's important to understand the context of how technology has changed healthcare over the last 100 years. And so this is a slide showing 1923. Each one of these dots is a country. The size of the dot is the population of that country, and the color codes are associated with the regions of the world that it's in. So red is for Asia and the Middle East. And we can draw a line through this scattering of dots, because what we notice as countries got wealthier, their population got healthier. And we can draw a line that is this health-wealth line. And if you had looked at the way countries had moved on this health-wealth line in the previous 100 years, they had really just moved up and down that line. What was that? That was mostly better nutrition, better public health. You'll also notice, though, that 100 years ago, no economies were really over 60-year life expectancy. And that's not because, even if you're looking down at countries with 30-year life expectancy, the people were dropping dead at 30. It was the staggeringly high infant mortality that we had 100 years ago, and that things were very bifurcated. If you lived past 1 to 5 years old, you were likely to live to be elderly. So what happened since then? Well, if we play this data forward to today, we saw that things kind of went crazy during World War II. And then something amazing happened between World War II and the early 1990s. Every single one of these economies, normalized to today's dollars, still moved up above that 60-year life expectancy line. And you'll also notice that that health-wealth line flattened out. You'll also see that the region in Asia and the Middle East moved up in terms of health and then moved out in terms of wealth. So countries got healthy and then they got wealthy. What happened there? Vaccines, antibiotics, and lots of changes in surgery. And when we think about all of those, they are medical technologies. And they are medical technologies that fundamentally changed the landscape of healthcare over the last 40, 50 years. About 30 years ago, we started playing around with a new technology, robotics. And at this point, it was an idea. How were we going to be able to improve surgical care using this new technology? And the early robots were very crude. They looked very prototypey. Today, surgical robots are in hospitals all over the world, including many here in the United Arab Emirates. And it looks much slicker, feels very modern. But it's easy to forget that that was something that happened over 30 years. That this was a new technology 30 years ago, and it really took a while to fully get into common use. And so when we think about adoption of technology, and we need to apply this to technologies that have happened and technologies that we're thinking about happening in the future, there's always a lot of early excitement by a few early pioneers who see where that technology can go. But it always has a chasm that it needs to come across, where those early adopters aren't enough to carry a technology fully into common use. And it's not until it gets adopted more widely that you really start to see it come into its own. And we've seen this, and you may be well familiar with this, in terms of the hype cycle. So people get extremely excited about a new technology that comes out. They think it's going to do absolutely everything, and then some of the reality starts to set in, and there's that trough of disappointment. And then we really do finally figure out what that technology is good for. And that's where we sort of build it into the day-to-day use in medicine. And that's where we get to when we mature a technology as we're bringing it out and see its full potential. And so again, Intuitive Surgical, which makes robots, surgical robots, is a 30-year overnight success. It has taken 30 years for the technology to get as mature as it is today. And so when you're thinking about what do I want to invest in? What am I thinking is going to be the future of surgery? What is going to be the future of healthcare? How are we going to bring new technologies in? You've got to remember that at the beginning, when my husband first started working for Intuitive Surgical, that was 2001. And there were pretty much a couple hundred procedures that had been done. This is early in the regulatory cycle. When I joined Intuitive Surgical in 2006, when I'd finished my medical training, maybe 100,000 procedures had been done in total around the entire globe. You can't see that we're at over 2 million procedures a year, every year, from where you are there, unless you can put on your futurist goggles and you can see where a technology is going to go. And so you need to be able to look at something like this, which is a little robotic hand, and be able to say, if I can control that with the motion of a surgeon's hand and be able to put that through a small incision, surgery will get better. That the big incision serves no therapeutic purpose, that a small incision will always be better for the patient. And at that point, you can believe that you will get to the end of that technology curve. As we've been going along, we've also been really trying to focus on the wicked problems, the hard problems in medicine, the places where there's a big gap between what the clinician wants to be able to do for their patient and what they can do for their patient. And we bring in technologies like robotics that can come in parallel and be able to deploy inside the body so that we can go from 3 incisions or 5 incisions just to 1. We also start looking for big problems like lung cancer, a big gap between diagnostics and then being able to do therapeutics. And we knew we wanted to treat lung cancer better, but we didn't know how to do it until one day this technology came across our transom. This is a fiber Bragg grating. It is a glass fiber that is interrogated with a laser. And you can know the point, the tip, within a millimeter with a meter-long fiber. And this was exciting because what it let us do was now understand the shape of a catheter that we were putting in, know where the tip of that catheter is, and be able to steer that through the body with incredibly high precision. We knew the problem. We didn't have the technology yet. We'd already been making robots. But when this new sensor came out, we could now make a new robot. And we were able to add these new technologies together and build a robot around the idea of that catheter. And so what does that catheter let you do? And there's a lot of technologies that came together on this particular robot that weren't even conceivable when we first started building robots. So those technologies are, we needed machine learning to be able to allow us to parse out the bronchial tree. We needed to have navigation so that we could navigate our way through and be able to get to a tumor that's up in the apex of the lung. We needed to be able to meld the view that the surgeon is seeing on the bottom right, which you can see is somewhat obscured, with the synthetic view that we were able to present them from the reconstructed CT scan and be able in real time to do a biopsy and get a tissue sample. So being able to bring a new technology in the form of the sensor, the fiberbrad grating, being able to bring in machine learning algorithms and being able to build navigational were all necessary to be able to bring together this particular robot. So why were we interested in this? Why is this one of the wicked problems? Well, because in the past, if you had a small nodule that was found in your lung and you underwent imaging for it, 9 out of 10 times when it's small, it's going to be benign. And so you do not want to do an open lung surgery to take out a benign tumor. You kill more people than you save if you take that approach. And so for a long time, the way we managed looking at a nodule was to do serial CT scans, and then when the nodule had grown large enough, then go in and do the surgery. But often what that meant is that the survival of the patient was halved because the size of the nodule had grown enough that they were now going from maybe a 15%, maybe an 80% chance of seeing a 5-year anniversary from diagnosis back to maybe a 40% chance of seeing a 5-year anniversary after diagnosis. Also, during that entire time, if you're going in for CT scans to rule out cancer, it's hard to not believe that you have cancer. And this is an 18-month ordeal for a patient who is waiting for that workup. What we could see when we saw that new catheter was being able to identify that lesion, snake in through the bronchial tree, sample that lesion, give them a definitive diagnosis, and then be able to do an immediate surgery. We were able to bring this down to 4 weeks. Now, earlier this week, I was in Los Angeles at a VC conference in life sciences, and I was talking to the head of innovation at the Mayo Clinic. She's a thoracic surgeon that uses this technology, and she is now doing a single anesthesia event process, which means she puts the patient under, does the catheter procedure. If it's cancer, she never wakes the patient up. She goes straight into doing the resection and then wakes the patient up with their cancer cured. And so now she's looking at a 48-hour turnaround from first seeing that nodule to having a definitive care. This is the kind of thing where when a new technology comes and it helps you solve one of the wicked problems in medicine, this is going to be durable. This is going to be the kind of thing that will move you out into the future. So lots of people have been looking at robots in the last 30 years since these first robots came out. Robots have been used in eye surgery, in bone surgery, new ones coming out in dental surgery, and being able to think about ways in which you can do needle biopsies from inside of a CT scanner. And they're out there and they're commercially viable. But what's interesting about all of these is that the robot is really the platform. And again, I think of the robot as the thing that drives that hand. I think of the robot as the thing that drives that catheter. What's happening all during that time is every movement that the surgeon is making is getting translated through a robot. And that means that something that was previously unobservable, the motions of surgery, the things that people are doing, now becomes data. And once it becomes data, we can analyze it as data. We can start to bring in data analytic tools to give us insight into what's going on. The previously unobservable process of somebody learning is now observable. We start to be able to synthesize data from millions of procedures and be able to drive insights around not just how is that procedure being done, but how is that procedure fitting inside the workflow of a hospital? How is changes in the procedures that we're doing affecting how people are moving out of critical care following their surgery? How are we thinking about changing the face of medicine and being able to measure it? Because being able to look at the data allows us to really think about it in a much more analytic way. And so when we think about the ways in which we incorporate these new kinds of data analytics onto the robot, we are doing things like taking preoperative CT scans of an individual patient prior to their surgery, making a 3D model of all of their organs, and allowing preoperative planning. You don't need to do that for most procedures, but for the really tricky ones, you really need to know where are the vessels sitting with respect to the tumor. Another one of these wicked problems is when you take the tumor out, often you don't necessarily know if you've left a small amount of it behind. It's too small to see. But if we could put near-infrared imaging in and be able to get these tumors to light up, you would be able to see residual cancer in the tumor bed in real time without having to send it off to pathology, get a section that says, well, you've got a positive margin, you need to go back for another surgery. In real time, we can determine whether you need to take more. We can also really start to study how people learn. For the first time, as I said, we're taking surgery and making the process of surgery observable, which means we can take clinicians who are going from being a novice to being an expert, and we can watch them as they progress. We can take a lot of experts and we can look at the differences between what those experts are doing and what the novices are doing. We start to be able to characterize and understand expertise, and that helps us teach it. And so when we think about using artificial intelligence, you were wondering, what point was I going to get to AI? Because everybody's talking about AI, but you've got to think about the problem you're trying to solve with AI. And in this situation, bringing AI and machine learning in to objectively look at people's skills, to be able to figure out how is it that we move someone from being a novice to an expert. This is where we start to look at the characteristics of the way these things are performed. The other thing that we start to be able to do is when we think about the way in which we train clinicians, you work on a series of patients over and over again, and you hope to learn all of the skills that you need in this long sequence of patients. It's very opportunistic. A patient with a particular type of condition comes across, and you learn about that. We don't train pilots that way. They don't fly in fair weather over and over and over again, and then we expect them to be able to manage a thunderstorm. What we can do when we're really starting to think about the ways in which we're training is we can train on the edge cases. We can train on the difficult maneuvers. We can drill people over and over and over again on not doing the same simple thing again and again and hoping that you'll learn one tricky maneuver in a procedure, but instead drilling on those tricky maneuvers so the first time you see it clinically, you're already excellent at it. And so this is one of those things that when we start to deconstruct these kinds of skills, we start to be able to improve the pace at which we're training. And I'm going to talk about why I think we really need to improve the pace of training. So this is another way of looking at the data that I talked about at the beginning, where I showed you all of those countries moving up to the health wealth line. This is an age distribution chart for the Americas in green, Europe in yellow, Africa in blue, and Asia and the Middle East in red. And so this is the distribution of age from 0 to 100 years old in 2020. We run this forward, and these are models of the way populations are going to be growing in these various economies. And you'll notice that the Americas and Europe are stable or contracting. Africa is continuing to grow. It is an incredibly young population. And the largest economies that are going to be emerging in the next 70 years, 2 of them are on the African continent. And so when you look at something like this and you say the training for clinicians largely came out of economies like the Americas and Europe, replacement populations, populations that were growing very slowly, populations where it was okay to have senior clinicians teaching just one junior clinician to replace them. Those models of training do not work in very, very fast growing populations because we cannot keep pace. The other thing is because when we think about building medical infrastructure, a lot of people think about, oh, I need to build hospitals. But you can build a hospital in about a year. It takes you 10 years to train the clinicians that are going to be in that hospital. And when we're talking about demographic changes that are happening faster than these 10-year cycles, that is a really big mismatch between the kinds of infrastructure that we're needing to build. This is particularly acute in sub-Saharan Africa. And so when we are thinking about this training of this next generation of clinicians in those fastest growing economies, we are the farthest behind in these areas. And so when I say we're far behind, we do globally about 300 million surgeries a year, and we're missing about 150 million surgeries. People who just simply do not have access to life-saving surgery that they need when they have an accident, when there is postpartum hemorrhage. We are losing young people because we don't have surgical capacity. This results in 7 to 17 million potentially preventable deaths if we could just have enough surgeons out there and enough surgical infrastructure. And when I talk about these levels of mortality, compare it to 3 million deaths a year from HIV, TB, and malaria combined. Compare this 17 million to 10 million deaths a year globally from cancer. And you'll see why I tend to sort of shake my fists and say surgery needs to be thought about as a cornerstone of public health. It's a hard problem. It's one of these wicked problems. It's one of those big gaps between what we want to be able to do and what we can do. And so when we are really thinking about ways in which we can change the face, this is where I want to bring the technologies in. Because scaling surgery, yes, it needs hospitals, and it needs equipment, and practitioners, and nurse midwives, and medical officers. But to scale it exponentially, we need a really radical rethink on training. This is an example of what a technology adoption curve on the left, cell phones, and a medical education curve on the right, training doctors. These are exactly the same economies over the same period of time. Cell phones, that 100 line is 1 cell phone per person. So no cell phones in existence in 1985, more than 1 cell phone per person in many economies in the world by today. At the same time, exact same economies, that is what a linear training process, that is what a replacement training process looks like. These economies did not want doctors any less than they wanted cell phones, but there's a fundamentally different way in which technology adoption can happen if you can do exponential kind of changes. And so we have scaled reading-based knowledge acquisition. If you can learn it from reading it, you can learn it anywhere in the world. If you can learn it from watching a video, you can learn it from anywhere in the world. But through the millennia, we have taught skills one-on-one and in person. And we've done that by bringing people together, demonstrating a skill, watching them do this, perform the skill, and correcting them. We our coaches, we teach them how to do this. And this is what keeps us in that linear training modality. So, but the clinician is still doing the practice. What is the thing that is keeping us from going exponential is that feedback, that assessment, that coaching. And so if we could turn that assessment into something that a clinician could administer to themselves, that they could teach themselves these skills, this would be the key to unlocking it. We know the adage in medicine of see one, do one, teach one. This is the apprenticeship model of medicine. We could turn it into see one, teach yourself one, and then do one, if we can bring self-assessment in. And so I ran research for Intuitive Surgical for years, and then I was in emerging market strategy, and I spent a lot of time in emerging markets. And it was this period of time that really brought me to understand the coming demographic tsunami of not having enough clinicians. And so I now run Intuitive's foundation, and we put together the Surgical Education Learners Forum. This is a program that is designed to create training modules that are using advanced technology assessment in order to be able to train at the point of care anywhere in the world. And when I mean anywhere in the world, I mean in district hospitals in very, very under-resourced areas. And so the winners of the initial challenge that we did created laparoscopic training boxes that you could make out of cardboard. But the big technology push in this is that they're using their cell phones to video themselves. They upload it to a peer-to-peer platform, and they review one another's videos with a checklist. We have ample evidence that shows that a novice with a checklist is as good, if not better, at evaluating it. And we're training AIs to give immediate feedback on the performance of that, and so that people can get rapid, formative feedback and be able to practice on their own. So there was a hospital in sub-Saharan Africa where the entire clinical group, from the trainees all the way up to the senior clinicians, trained themselves on laparoscopic surgery. Nobody flew in to teach them. And now that hospital is doing 7 to 9 laparoscopic cases per week. It's a model that we can scale much further beyond. This is a funny example in that for teaching around a tib-fib fracture, so that's a fracture of the lower leg, in a province, in a small district hospital that was in a province that had 3.5 million people in it, there were only 2 orthopedic surgeons to cover 16 hospitals. And these medical officers were often sending people to traditional bone setters because they didn't have the skills to be able to manage a lower limb fracture. Ironically, in that same area where there were 2 orthopedic surgeons, there were 4 places they could get 3D printing done. So they could 3D print these bones, practice on these 3D printed bones, get to excellence on being able to do these tib-fib fracture, and be able to move forward with being able to do these skills with no instructor ever going there. So again, this move of new technologies that are leapfrogging the way that we're doing training is allowing us to bring in a lot of these new things. And so I mentioned with that laparoscopic trainer that we are training AIs to do this kind of peer review. So we're building this platform and extending it to other forms of training. We're also using AI to build a recommendation engine to match people who need training to the best available materials that are out there, because often it's a dizzying array of things that you can't find. And so the user enters, I need training in this procedure in this particular environment. We've done AI training on a huge amount of reference material that we then evaluate all the training materials that are out there and match this student to, or this learner to, the best material that's available for them, give them back their best match, and then get feedback so that we can keep this recommendation engine getting better and better. This is getting integrated into a larger community of practice. And today, the West African College of Surgeons and the College of Surgeons of East, Central, and Southern Africa have both formally adopted the use of this kind of self-administered training into their fellowship exams. So when we think about investing for the future, it's really about what are we solving, the wicked problems? How are we bringing these new technologies that are coming in and saying, I have a backlog of important patient-related problems. What can I apply it to solve these problems? As opposed to, I have a technology, I'm going to think about it as my hammer. What nails can I go hit with my hammer? And so for what we're doing in the foundation is we are building this community of practice to be able to integrate these new technologies as they come into this educational milieu. We're putting together a nonprofit in order to be able to support all of the delivery of these particular tools and training tools. We're going to continue to develop regionally specific training modules and keeping a dialogue going globally about how we're going to be able to move this forward and the kind of data that we need for this. So there are so many different ways that we could be tackling problems associated with patient care. There are elements of the financial challenges. We can be bringing in robotics, AI. We need to consider data privacy. We need to be anticipating personnel shortages. We need to be thinking about lots of the ways in which we bring in disruptive technology. But at the center of all of this, we always need to be thinking in terms of these technologies will be good investments, they will be good bets if they are solving real problems. And that's the lens that I'm always looking at these things through. And so going back 30 years ago, there was a lot of surgery being done. We had robotics, and we were trying to solve the problem of better minimal access. And so we had some new robotic tools, and we started to change the practice of surgery. Looking forward, it's the data and the full integration of the data and all of the insights we're going to be able to drive from this data that will fully meld what we could really do for patients in the future. And so we're somewhere in between right now. We've got a lot of new, exciting AI and ML tools. Some of them are kind of on the hype cycle. Some of them, we're really starting to see them come into their own. But it is a really exciting time to be jumping some things forward as we think about technology in the next 10 years and 20 years and 70 years. And so I enjoy working at the intersection of healthcare and technology. I think it is the place that allows us to really focus fundamentally on the person that really matters in all of this, which is the patient. And we can imagine that better, healthier future for them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Kathleen, for this valuable and informative lecture. Next, I will invite you and the audience for a few question and answers. The first question for you, Dr. Kathleen, any new idea or product at one point needs funding in order to make it to fruition. How can the investor community add value to healthcare technology?
Well, there's so many different ways in which we can do investment, from venture capital to doing government investment for larger populations to things like philanthropic investment that I'm doing. And I think they each have their own niche. And we need to think about, with venture, can I get a return on investment? With government programs, how am I best benefiting the population? And in the areas of philanthropy, I'm using it to focus on, can we build new thought infrastructure associated with it? There are so many rich problems out there that all of these areas of investment are needed, and they can move it forward in synergy with one another.
Another question I have, I mean, looking at technology, it's moving at such a rapid speed that eventually there's a lag between regulations, policies, and governance. What can regulators do to ensure that the technology is not only effective, but is actually safe and secure, especially in medicine where privacy is a big issue?
Yeah, that's always an interesting thing to take on, because as an innovator, classically you're expected to rail against regulators, like, oh, they're keeping us back. But really what regulators are doing is they're trying to keep this impossible balance between promoting the public health, which means bringing out new things as rapidly as they can, and protecting the public health, which is slowing down bringing things out because maybe it might not be fully safe. And so I think the key thing that we can do as innovators and people who are trying to push the envelope is to keep those dialogues going with regulators, but also for both groups to think, we're going to bring it out in a limited way, and instead of creating all the data before we come out, let's continue to gather data after it's come out and see if we see safety signals later. And I think in that way we can be both nimble and safe. But it requires real conversation between innovators and regulators, and recognizing that we really are all on the same side.
As you know, the UAE leverages technology almost in all of its sectors, and healthcare is one of them, and is in the forefront in that field. What advice will you give the healthcare sector to keep in mind moving forward in order to maintain and remain in the front line for the next 20 years?
Well, and it's, like I said, just the pace of growth here is astonishing. And I can see that kind of continuing as it's going forward. And to continue to stay relevant, I think it's always thinking in terms of closing that gap. So when you're evaluating a new technology and you're saying, do we want to invest, do we want to add this into our healthcare system? Is it bright and shiny and it has some new bells and whistles, but will it increase access? Will it increase patient outcomes? Will it improve, if as long as you're using that litmus test and really saying, how do I understand the story of how that technology adoption will affect these things, you won't go astray. If you just say, oh, it's AI, and so therefore it's got to be better, you can sink a lot of money into something like that and never see the benefits of it. So keep the patient forefront, and UAE will stay out in the front.
You know, in one of your slides, you actually showed technology advancement in surgery, where microsurgery in the lungs using precision without opening the chest. Now, I'm sure this technology, and there's many other technology, how can we make the time from these being experimental or being used in selective places to being open across the field? Not only the technology, but also the skill set of the healthcare workers to be able to do that. How can we shorten this time?
I'm going to come back to education again, because really in a lot of the adoption cycles of these things, it's you can make the technology, but training people to use it and getting teams to be really excellent at using it is often the gating step for being able to get wide adoption of a new technology. And we aren't structured as a healthcare or as a medical training world to teach people after they're already attendings. And so I'm excited about if we can build in all of the training for using a device into that device, so that when you as a clinician have that device, it will teach you how to use it as you are going along and how to become excellent at it. This is where we start to be able to bring it out in parallel everywhere in the world. We stop being gated by that educational step.
Thank you. In conclusion, today's lecture highlighted how technology has positively impacted medicine and healthcare by making it precise and accessible. Also, how the integration of new technologies such as artificial intelligence and big data is expected to bring about significant changes in the decision-making process and also the error rates in medicine. I extend my sincere Thanks to Your Highness for gracing us with your presence today, to Dr. Kathleen and Moore for your expertise and time, to all esteemed attendees. And now it's my honor to invite Your Highness and the participant in the introductory video to join us on stage for a group photo. Thank you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.